I'd like to acknowledge that this episode of Teachcast was recorded on the homelands of the Darug people. I'd like to pay respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening to Teachcast today. Welcome to Teachcast, a podcast by teachers for teachers.
I'm Shannon and
I'm Siobhan. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Teachcast. Whether you're a new listener or someone chiming in again, thank you for joining us. Today we have a special guest, Casey, a teacher in a New South Wales public school on the homelands of the Darug people. Casey is also a head teacher of teaching and learning. And today we have him on the podcast to discuss differentiating content, lesson processes for your diverse learners. Welcome to the couch, Casey.
Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. We love to kick off and let everyone get settled in with a teacher this or that. So the first one we have up for you is indoor learning or outdoor learning?
It depends, I think. When I have like a boys' literacy or a really rambunctious class, I mix it up, get them in and out of the classroom. We have quite long periods.
Yeah.
They're 76 minutes, so chunking with certain kids is really important, so it can be really fun to take them outside. But yeah, it just depends on what you're doing.
Yeah, versatility. So
I think so. I'm an English teacher, so sometimes being outside and reading can be quite nice and things like that. And there's
a nice shaded area.
Yeah, then get out with nature. And then there's some podcasts. I don't know if people look into them, but where they're experiential podcasts and you run around outside with it in your ears and and they tell you to do things. So you get the kids running around and but when you're writing, it's kind of in the classroom.
Yeah. I'm adding that to my toolkit. I love, again, also an English teacher. I love taking my students outdoors for reading or getting their hands dirty within the within the areas of the school. So I'm an outdoor learner, but obviously indoor for necessary writing tasks and things like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think a mix of both as well. Like anytime being primary school based, like anytime I could go outside and do some outdoor learning, it was always like, I wanted it not to be like that special experience, like that they felt like it only happened sometimes. So I tried to be quite fluid with how I would do it. And then we ended up getting like a upgrade where the Wi-Fi worked outside. Oh. So, there was the boundaries were really lifted then.
Yeah, that helps
I could do everything outside that I could do in the classroom.
I love that.
All right. The next one we have is, do you prefer to listen to music while you're working or quiet working environment?
So marking obviously is the bane of the English teacher. But what I've tricked myself into doing is listening to Beethoven and Mozart. And I've got myself to a point whereas if I put that on, that is now my trigger to mark. And it actually psychologically helps me get through it. So it's no words, but yeah, I've kind of trained myself that when that comes on, I'm like, oh, I need to mark. And,
where
it's
are the
weird.
Books? Where are the books?
That's right.
Ding, ding, ready to go.
And it's weird when you hear it out in the world, isn't it? Because you're like,
oh, I should be marking.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Get me my red pen and my stamp. What about you, Siobhan?
Casey just like made me think back to in my year 12 English classes, we do bell writing time. So I'd set like a timer and we'd do brainstorms and segments of writing. But I found that this song called So What by Miles Davis, which is just like jazz music playing in the background, it goes for the perfect length of time.
It's something like a little rendition.
Oh, it's just like do 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 do. So
like elevator music.
Yeah.
Calming.
And it was like 11 minutes and 45 seconds, which ended up being the sweet spot for my students. So really similar to what Casey was doing. They probably listen to it now and have psychological trauma.
Yeah, that's right. It's like, oh my God, I've got to start writing.
So what by Miles Davis, need to start my creative writing.
Well, it's so true because I used to listen to classical music while studying at university. Like that was just like my thing. And even in year 12, actually, classical music was the thing that just like got me in the headspace that I was ready to, do some learning, do some revision.
In terms of like within my classroom, I actually really do like using it, especially after recess or lunch to calm the students down. Literally on YouTube, like lo-fi hip hop beats, and it's like being in a cool cafe. I think it's really trendy and like, wow, I love that. To get them sort of focused back into the routine. For me personally though, I always forget to listen to music when I'm doing like independent work because I've got a lot of thoughts running through my head, but then I turn the music on and it like helps me focus. So yeah, I think that I'm either or. Music when I remember to do music. What about you?
Yeah, definitely. I think like I enjoy listening to something classical, but then I think it's funny because often when I would drive home after a day of teaching, I would like silence because I think we're around so much different noise in our environment all day long that was the thing. The silence was quite nice in that sense. But while I was marking, I liked a bit of classical music.
Yeah, I agree.
The next question is a sports extracurricular or an academic extracurricular?
I think I love sport, so I'm a big advocate. But I think there's a lot of correlation between kids being active and supporting the academic side of things. I think if you're stagnant all day, it's not good for the body, and what's not good for the body is not good for the mind. So I think kids should be as active as possible.
All about those brain breaks as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. What about you?
I feel like I've said this a million times, but I'm like debating coach extraordinaire. I'm really competitive with debating, so
Her title gets more and more.
I'm pretty serious with my debating. So I would say in terms of extracurricular, that would be my favorite academic extracurricular. But also I have led the school netball team to victory too. So really I just sat on the sideline and clapped and they did all the work. But, either or.
They still need you there, right?
That's right, yeah. Blow the whistle a few times, say good job.
I sit it somewhere in the happy middle.
Yeah.
I feel like, we often joke like primary school teachers, jack of all trades. So I find it hard to make up my mind and like have a point of like I love doing that extracurricular because I think each one gives me something different. Yeah. Well, we might dive right in and let's go back to the beginning. Tell us, Casey, how did you find yourself to where you are today, head teacher and learning?
Well, I guess my mother was a English teacher originally, and then she worked with the department. So I've always kind of followed in her footsteps as far as like looking at the kind of science of teaching and learning, because part of her role was a literacy coordinator, and she had to obviously know what works best and supported schools in doing that. So through her contacts, I was an SLSO when I was working through uni, which was I really recommend if you can get in to work in a school before teaching. I think that's like a massive support to understanding what schools are like, because they're like these complex organisms that, you can't fully comprehend until you're in it. And then I did my prac at the school that I'm currently at, and they picked me up. I applied for the job, and I was fortunate enough, I think in 2009, and I've stayed at that school ever since. I took 1 year off to look after my daughter. And went to uni, started a Masters of Education, and that kind of fed my passion of teaching and learning side of things. And then I was fortunate enough to get the job at my school as teaching and learning, and that's where I've stayed.
So is that like a Masters of Educational Leadership?
Yes, it was.
I think for me as a primary school teacher, I'm fascinated to know like what's a day look like as a head teacher and learning? What's it all about?
So you're not necessarily, like, unlike a faculty head teacher where you're managing the daily runnings of a group of staff like an English head teacher, if someone's away, you're making sure the casual cover's all done, and you are a leader of curriculum, but there's a lot more day-to-day running. I handle more of the overarching school direction. So I work with the principal on writing the school plan, implementing those sort of things. I look after all the professional learning. We monitor all the fun stuff like the mandatory training, making sure people are up to date with those things. I'll support people with their accreditation and things like that, and their maintenance. So that's pretty much what a day-to-day looks like. Teachers will ask me for support, and I might work with them on a project or come into their classroom and give them feedback as well.
Yeah, fantastic.
I want to pick up from where you were talking about supporting teachers of any kind, but particularly beginning teachers. What does the support that you provide to them look like?
So that's more of a team support at our school, because we have a head teacher mentoring, which looks after the beginning teachers. I will come in and I present to them on things like cognitive load theory. They also get support in behaviour management and content related support, and learning intention, success criteria, and all those sort of things, and supporting them in developing and implementing those in the classroom. As I say, my role comes in more as the whole school, and if people ask for that support with the beginning teachers. But at our school, I think it's a really well-established program now that they get a lot of support from multiple places, and I think that's the philosophy we use, is that you might not connect with one of us in the leadership team, but there's lots of avenues of support.
So alongside your head teacher and learning role, what kind of classes do you have on your teaching load?
At the moment, I've got all the senior English teaching. That's probably just this year we've had a bit of a turnover in staff, so I've had to pick up more senior load. But traditionally, I like to take the junior school as well, and particularly the boys literacy program, which we've developed.
Oh, cool. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so we're full comprehensive, and that's one of the best things about working in a public school is the fact that in any one day I'm working with a kid that could get a 99 ATAR. I'm also working with kids that really need a lot of high-end support and needs, and so every day you're challenged and there's something different. It really keeps the day interesting. So with the boys literacy, we kind of identified that we don't run it every year, but there's years when you're like, wow, those year 8s, they're really struggling.
Support, yeah.
So we take them out and we support them through changing the curriculum to match their needs. It's a lot of chunking, so we might get them outside a bit more and get them a bit more active, and just ensuring, English can be seen as quite feminine, so we pick more masculine texts and things that we think they'll enjoy. So one of my favourite units to teach them is Lord of the Flies. Boys running riot on an island seems to go really well.
Relatable content for them.
Yeah, that's right. And then we turn the classroom into the island, and then the reward on the back of that is they have to take all the imagery of the island and they have to make it in Minecraft. And then they've got to justify to me, well, why did you make the island look like that? Oh, because the book says it looks here. And they really enjoy that. And then they blow it up at the end because that's just what they like to do.
Yeah, but what a cool differentiation strategy 100%. For your students who do require, additional support, for example, to engage them. You obviously know your students. That's quite evident from what you just said. They're engaged with Minecraft. It's the big thing with students. Yeah. Some cohorts. I myself have had many Minecrafters. Yeah. Learnt so much from them all, but you're right. That's a great way to bring them along on the journey and have them embed that technology with their learning.
I think it's really important to rethink just the approach with a lot of the tasks that you present in English and just getting a little bit creative with students in teaching them literacy. I personally am a massive rap and hip hop fan. So as many times as I can bring in the lyricism of rap or the culture and history of hip hop into my lessons, I think the students really pick up and play into that. So many a times I've created a very achievable rubric on, the basics of spitting some fire bars for the kids to get them down.
Can we get a bit of a...
that'll be an off-camera moment.
I think we could really weave it into our intro. Yeah, I think you bring a really good point there, Casey. Some talent unlocked.
That's right. But I typically use that approach as a revision strategy or a hook into a lesson. So depending on the mood of the students and how interested they are perhaps to engage in a topic. I mean, you'd potentially find typically Shakespeare might be something that students are really apprehensive towards at the start, but once you bring in some sort of interesting hook or element, I find that you get them on side quicker.
I was just listening on the way here to a podcast with Dylan Willem, who is my favourite researcher at the moment, but they were talking about the debate between explicit instruction and inquiry engagement learning, and that constructivist learning. And the point is that if the kids don't feel engaged or hooked or feel like they belong in your classroom, it doesn't matter what kind of teaching strategy you're using. If you don't hook them in and make them feel welcome and meet the learning where they're at, no learning's going to take place anyway.
Yeah, I like how you've touched on that, the importance of creating that positive environment where they feel like they belong and they feel like they have a piece of that classroom as well. I think, coming from the primary space, it almost can be a little bit easier in a sense, depending on the school that you're at. In a high school, sometimes you move rooms, sometimes you stay in your room, whereas I come from a place where I'm in my room for the 12 months with my students. So I have that opportunity to really build that classroom learning space and make it sort of, our team environment. How do you do that in your high school experience?
Well, I think in high school, and especially with boys, the boys are more likely to attribute the teacher to the subject. So you become that in a boys literacy setting, you really become that environment and the way you approach them. So if they know you're welcoming and you want them in the room and you want them to learn, it doesn't matter what room you're in as much. Ideally, it would be great to have your own room and get them working, but I think that's a key takeaway, is that boys generally associate the teacher with the subject, not the other way around.
Yeah, more than the four walls.
That's
I
right.
like that.
Home is where the teacher is. That's like it's going to my mind. So with your boys literacy group, what are some like real baseline strategies that a beginning teacher could potentially use in their classroom? For me, one that I typically used was sentence starters in that English context. I think that really gets over the initial apprehension to just at least put pen to paper. That can be a certain initial hurdle. What else do you use in the classroom?
I think we do a lot of visual support. So you instead of like getting them to try and find their own information, I'll print out the actual like quotes that they need to use. So say we're writing an essay, and I'll print out 20 quotes, and then we do a lot of activities around like, okay, well, which one's saying what, rather than trying to get them to go find them, which might be problematic. You just give them the
like
material.
a little maze.
Well, yeah, because that's the explicit teaching coming out, right? So there's nothing to say that if we look at a quote together that I've found and we talk about it, break it down,
We can,
they don't know it any better because they went and found it themselves. You're just saving yourself a lot of time.
Absolutely.
And because with a lot of these kids, that they'll get lost or they'll get bored. And so if you just tell them, hey, look, here's your quotes. And because when you build it together that way, they get that success. And that's what you really want to build in the kids, is a sense of success, because that causes motivation. So sometimes you got to really work super hard to get that first look at how well we've done as a group and look at how well you've achieved. And that achievement then leads to motivation for next time.
That's a really good strategy. I like that. I've done something before where I've auctioned off quotes to students. So I've given them like fake, dollary doos and said, bet on your favorite quotes. And then we discuss at the end, well, why did everybody put their hand up for this particular quote? It must be one that's rich in value and that you would use over and over again. So that was a really good way for them to see in a different perspective what was useful within the text and what wasn't, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a high engagement, right? Like they're having a bit of fun. And
strategy.
Yeah, and it's a good way to trick people, in the kids especially, into getting their thoughts out there. Because I think that, again, is getting kids talking, so you can assess what they're picking up and not. So any opportunity you can do to assess and formatively assess how they're going is really important.
Yeah. And I love like building a little bit of magic as well around an experience. So when I would start a new novel with my students, one year I introduced this thing where I wrapped the novel up and I put it in a box, and it was like a secret delivery. I mean, it's very primary school, but everything.
We do it in high school. We do blind date with a book.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so we had to like take guesses, and there were like, I had little clues each day, sort of like in the lead up, and the suspense was just so much fun. Like, it turned out to be one of like my favorite novels that I studied with the class, but I think I pinpoint that to like how much hype and excitement was surrounding like, what's it going to be, like the suspense of it all. So as much as that's like wonderful for your students, also as a teacher, I feel like you're on that journey with them. You're like, oh, what's going to be?
So your fifth year teaching the same novel, but you're like, I'm ready. I'm excited. I'm engaged.
New way, package it up in a different manner.
I like that. Well, what about for your typical student? I suppose we've talked about like our fairly disengaged, in your context, your disengaged boys. You're also teaching your higher end students, and we can touch on that later, particularly in your extension 2 classes and things like that. What about just your middle of the road strategies for differentiation for your typical class?
I think it's really important to know the issues within each classroom. So I think high school, what we deal with a lot is apathy. And so it's a matter of, well, how do you hook them in and make them feel like they want to achieve, or they're not just going to go home and play 5 hours of PlayStation. So how do we combat these things? Often food's a really good one. Food motivates kids, so
Motivates me too.
it does. It motivates all
I'm a
of us.
full-grown adult.
So just little things that you can do is be welcoming when they come in, and I think for me, environment is key. So they walk in, if a kid's 5-10 minutes late to your class, it's not like berating them in front of, because those middle kids can do it, right? But the more welcome they feel when they enter the room, that tends to be a really important factor to that success. And then all your strategies work across the board as well. Like essay writing in particular is very daunting for kids. So using sentence starters across the board is not a problem. You can just change the complexity of them.
That's right.
So often you'll find that strategy is actually really, really, you level the strategy. And it's how you level the scaffolding and things like that. I think for those middle classes, what am I doing at the moment? I've got a year 12 kind of middle class, and I think it's a lot of kids in that middle ground. I think it's more motivation and getting them really engaged in the content, explicit teaching as well. So
Yeah.
telling kids, hey, this is what this is.
Yeah.
I've found that showing sample pieces of writing to my all students, but particularly to my senior students, showing them, giving them a sample piece of writing, showing them the marking criteria in comparison to that, and getting them to go through and they mark it.
Yeah.
We come back and we discuss, well, why was this a 16 out of 20? Why is this sitting in the B range? Or perhaps they've sort of given it an A or a C, and we discuss where it actually sits and why. Then they can see what's expected of them. So I think, explicit.
Such a good way, like flipping it, and then they know the rubric through and through and what you expect, and they know what's expected of them.
Absolutely. So I worked with a colleague who did a research project on exactly that. And so there's an article in the ETA that I co-authored with Samantha, now at the HSC strategy with the department. I think, do they work here?
Yeah,
Probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so she'll be around here somewhere.
Yeah.
But she did this whole implementation where we did success criteria, but breaking it down into language that the kids can use.
Yeah.
Because English criteria are so innately intangible.
Yes.
So part of our project and that she led was making sure that kids could utilize the language that was tangible on the page to the writing, and that's something that is still in play at our school today.
Well, that's excellent. Yeah.
So very similar, but
Yeah.
a huge focus.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Good, nice for me, knowing that I've been doing the right thing all along, which is good. What about for these students who are more academically inclined or gifted, or, wherever we're putting them in this space, who are potentially taking your extension subjects or in your classes working above level? How do you extend them in a way that's not tokenistic, I suppose?
Yeah, and that's always the challenge. I think when you teach Extension 2 English, the subject is innately inquiry-based, and that for gifted students is how you push them, getting them to ask good questions and getting them to kind of research and giving them skills to extend themselves for those gifted students. So at our school, we use inquiry or project-based learning to extend kids. And so that's a really good strategy, is making sure your explicit teaching is done, but then releasing control to the kids to show what they can do. A lot of fun stuff too. They like creating things. So we have a little podcasting space.
Yeah, great.
Not quite as fancy as this, but so we get kids to make podcasts and all sorts of things to share their
Should have
learning.
told us, we could have come down and podcasted right there.
I don't think you'd fit in the room, to be honest. Get about 3 people in there.
Beginner
Yeah.
podcaster studio.
Yeah, that's right.
They could probably teach us a thing or two, to be quite honest.
Some of my kids could,
Yeah.
They're fantastic, and
Yeah.
they really, because part of the Extension 2 course is learning your medium, and a lot of them do podcasting, so
Yeah,
they
so
become
cool.
expert by the end of it, and I start showing them the basics, and by the end they're teaching me how to do things. So
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a cool way to differentiate for them. Like, I feel like we're living in such a digital world where information is so accessible at our fingertips, and podcast is one of those really cool ways to easily digest information on the go.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's cool to hear that that's happening in schools all around New South Wales.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
really cool.
So the school context that you're currently at, it's a creative and performing arts school. Would you like to share with us what that kind of looks like and what it means?
Yeah, it's another layer to working in comprehensive high schools, which is all part of the fun. So we have kids that get in partially selective for creative and performing arts, so drama, dance, music, and now circus, which is really cool.
Wow,
Yeah.
a circus.
It is very cool.
Yeah, sign me up. It's more than that.
Maybe a little. No, but they get on the high ropes
Oh,
in the hall,
wow.
and the
Oh my
whole hall
gosh.
has been decked out with like the silks. I don't know if
Yeah,
you've seen
yeah,
the two,
yeah.
and they tie themselves up and then just let themselves drop, and you're like, it's super
Wow.
exciting to watch.
Wow.
So is that like an elective? Is that?
It's part of the Kappa stream,
Yeah.
but the good thing is that kids from that aren't selective do get opportunities to dance and drama, which not all schools get, which is very cool.
Amazing.
So what does that mean for us is the kids are out of class a lot because they're so talented.
Yeah.
And it makes the day busy. And I think my colleagues would say, it's a challenge, but what you get is this really dynamic group of kids that are really interesting and different. And they bring that into all their classrooms. So it is really, really cool, honestly, to see how talented these kids are and what they can bring and how you can leverage that in every classroom through presentations and collaboration, because they work in these, like the drama kids are always working to put on these skits in their subject. So obviously their collaboration skills are quite unique.
Wow. I'd love to see a maths skit.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you could really channel that in all your key learning areas.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, wow. Circus is incredible. Like, I just never even thought of that as an option. So
No, we've had it for a few years now, and just when you first hear about it, your first thought is clowns, right?
Yeah.
But then you watch it on our showcase nights, and you're just blown away by the acrobatic kind of Circus Soleil style.
yeah, and then so are there opportunities for your students, attending a creative and performing arts high school to go and showcase their skills in sort of that wider school community level, or?
Yeah, so it depends on the kids and the kind of strand that they're in. But we hold mid-year showcases at the school, and then we actually have our yearly showcase at the Riverside Theatre and sell it to the public. And so they all get to put on this massive 2-hour spectacle, which is every year very, very impressive. And obviously the Kappa staff at our school work so hard to make it as professional as it looks. And then they get opportunities at competitions, and we get kids at Encore. And I think one of our kids sang at school spec last year. It was a feature, wrote his own song, and actually got to sing the closing ceremony from memory. Yeah.
That's so cool. What an opportunity.
Yeah, it was sensational on TV and everything.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, gosh, imagine. I'd love to hear a little bit more about we talked a little bit about your strategies, but are there any sort of tools that you swear by, use every day in your repertoire of teaching?
I think learning routines are really important. So, making sure the kids have their learning intention, success criteria, but we call it DEAL, which is drop everything and learn. So when kids walk into the room, there's a little activity on the board and they just know to get their stuff out and to start writing.
Yeah.
Because I think having little learning routines like that, they build good habits, and the kids aren't like waiting for you to start. It's just on the board and they look up and they get going.
So how do you, as a head teacher teaching and learning, sort of get that whole school buy-in to that strategy? I think that's something that typically can be quite challenging across the school, is working with other staff and telling them the benefit of implementing a new strategy. It can be daunting for some people to implement things that they might not particularly know about. So how do you get whole school buy-in?
Well, we try the distributed leadership model where we get leaders from each one. Something that is a challenge at a high school, I think, is that different subject areas, not everything works
Not
everywhere.
a blanket strategy.
That's right, and that's the challenge. So,
but DEAL sounds like it is. It
is. DEAL's not too bad. I think in a prac setting it doesn't work necessarily, because like PE, go get changed, come out, and then get started. So you know what I mean. So in a woodwork classroom, there are. It's not necessarily uniform, but I think working with really amazing staff like we have, that they find ways of tweaking it to suit their KLA.
Yeah, I used to do drop everything and read.
Yep, the D's and
And my students, I had this one cohort. Honestly, it was like 30 little bookworms in a class.
They wouldn't put the book down.
They just loved it. But it brought me so much joy. And I had this one she was a little girl, and she said to me, she goes, "Oh, Miss, why don't you drop everything and read when we do?" So then I started doing it with them.
Yeah.
And I felt like me doing that, it just showed them, like, they were so happy to see me embracing what made them so happy as well. It was really nice to be able to share. And then we'd have a little chat in little groups about what was going on in everyone's text. It was a nice way to do it.
And that's a really important thing on modelling too,
Yes.
is making sure that we're modelling behaviours and modelling learning as well. So any opportunity you get to do it with the kids is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to, I was a big fan of Smiling Mind. And particularly when they would come in after a hot summer's lunchtime out on playing on the oval, we would do, it was like 5-minute guided meditation, and I would do it with them. And to be honest, it was a really nice way, particularly, if you were out on playground duty, for example, or, whatever you had going on at lunchtime. Sometimes that can take us in different directions, but it was a nice way to all reset together, I think. And then we were able to, take what we learned from that meditation in that space and then come into our next lesson.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like that. I think I would like to ask you, Casey, now a question about the impact or lasting impact that you feel being a teacher has had on your school community. Because from what I know,
No pressure.
from what I know, you're kind of part of the furniture there, right? You did your
Yeah.
placement there and haven't left since?
That's right. So I think
Yeah.
I've been there since 2009.
Yeah.
My daughter's starting there next year because I live in the local community. And I think just yesterday, and it was timing for the podcast, but I got an email from an ex-student who, and it's this huge email and I have to respond. But I've been really been flawed because she pretty much said the whole trajectory of her life had changed because she had some issues at high school that I supported her through with other members of the school community, and she is now a lawyer. And she's showed me pictures of her cat and her books and just a real thank you message. So I think that for me really sums up what it is like to be in public education, is that the moments of impact that you make on kids, and she graduated 4 years ago. And so the fact she's written me this very long personal letter thanking me for the support and impact that I've made on her really sums up what this job is about. It's about those moments of support and the impact you have on people's lives. And that's just a drug. It's so important to remember that that's why we do this job.
That's why we do what we do.
That's right. I actually know of and follow a teacher on Instagram. She recently just shared that one of the cards that she wrote on to farewell one of her students in Year 12 last year said with love from, and then her name. The student got part of her handwriting tattooed on her arm and came and saw it, said, "Miss, I've got your writing on my arm."
Wow.
I just think that what a phenomenal way to mark the impact that you can have on a student's life. There's nothing more flattering, I suppose, than seeing the impact that you can have on them. You can't really put it into words until you experience it, I feel.
No, absolutely not. And it's one of those things that I think every teacher's had that impact, and you don't always necessarily get to see it. Yeah. So when you do get those moments where that does happen, it's really, you got to savor it, because that's exactly the impact you have. We are the profession that feed all other professions. You've built that future lawyer, you've built the future doctor, you've built the future, trade assistant, whatever avenue the student chooses to go into, you've had a hand in shaping who they are. So
yeah. I always say to my students, I'm like, look around, you are the future of Australia. I'm like, no pressure, boys and girls. Oh no, that's really special. I think going back on what Siobhan was saying, part of the furniture at your current school, but what does it mean to be, live in your community area, have started your career there, and you would be known to your community in such a way because you've, spent so much time there?
It's really special, especially when you take through multiple siblings and the parents kind of go, "Oh, we're back here again." I'm like, "Oh, this is great." And there'll be instances where parents will reach out to me because I've dealt with their older siblings, and their older siblings have said, "Oh, this is great," and he'll help you with that.
You'd have that trusted connection.
That's right. Yeah. So no matter what is happening at the school, you get families go through, and they're the ones that come back, and they're so grateful for that support. So whilst there is a lot of people that take opportunity to move forward and move on from their schools, I think there's also, when you find a school that you feel so connected to, it's just really special. So as I say, I'm sending my kids to the same school, and I can't see myself leaving anytime soon. I usually joke that I'm probably going to die there. So.
No, but it's, for you as a teacher as well, it's obvious you've had a lot of opportunities within the one context to be able to grow and develop your professional skills. And I think that's really valuable as well, to go on that journey with the school. Yeah,
absolutely. So there are always opportunities with the department at the moment, obviously, to stay in your school and to work. And and as I say, I think there is a bit of luck when people retire and things like that. Yeah. But one thing about schools is obviously as I said before, they're like these organisms, and part of what's a big stress, I think, for new teachers is learning all the processes and procedures of a school. So I found staying at the one school where I kind of have all of it mastered in the way the school operates, not necessarily the teaching, but you feel really stable, and you don't have to go and learn all those school processes, because they're all kind of just there all the time. So I found that quite comforting to stay in one spot.
And each
Yeah.
to their own, right? Like some people love moving and jumping between contexts, trying out something new. Others feel more comfortable grounding their roots somewhere and really trying to work from the ground up
Yeah, that's right.
to build their career there. So I think, that's the beauty and the benefit, right, of our system.
Yeah,
It allows
absolutely.
you to do either or, which is great.
And what about your transition from, classroom teacher into an executive role, into your head teacher role?
Like the classroom, I think it's all about relationships. So you just got to work really hard on making sure those relationships are really good within the staff and your people that are around you.
Know your
as
staff
much
and
as-
how they learn.
Absolutely.
I mean,
So-
it's true. Like I say it in a jovial manner, but I do believe like relationships are your foundation.
Yeah, that's right. And understanding what the school context is, and we are a busy, comprehensive high school, so we try to minimise the disruption we make and just focus on what we think is really important.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Casey, for joining us today. It was really valuable to hear about how you differentiate for the diverse learner and, all the sort of the whole school element as well. It was really nice to get a snapshot into that at your school. So thank you so much for joining us. That's all from us today on The Couch. Thank you again for tuning in, listening on your preferred platform, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to Teachcast, where we explore the dynamic world of education. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to be notified when new episodes become available. You can find us on social media via our handle @teach.nsw. Until next time, keep learning, keep teaching, and keep making a difference. Teachcast is a podcast by the Teach New South Wales team from the New South Wales Department of Education.